Welcome to the demonstration portion of this presentation. As we discussed in the preceding slide deck, ProspectStream is a software as a service application delivered through a web browser, but it uses a rich internet application technology called Microsoft Silverlight, which you'll see gives a very interactive, rich user experience and very high performance. Let me go ahead and log in. I'm going to focus initially on showing you the end user experience within ProspectStream, what your sales reps would see first of all. Now, because I'm logged in as an administrator, I don't actually have any records to call. So I'm going to use an interesting feature of ProspectStream which allows me to impersonate any other user within the system, assuming I have those rights. So I'm going to impersonate Anna Claire. And you can see that she certainly does have records that need to be called. Now, the call list illustrates graphically here the status of the record. So the exclamation mark indicates that this record is actually past due a callback. The little telephone icon indicates that the record has never been called. And in some cases, you may also see a little calendar icon, which means the record is scheduled to be called today. Now, there are multiple views that the user can choose from. They can choose from the Today view, which is activities scheduled for today, or an All view, which is all of the records within their database, or the Retired or Completed view to see records that have completed the campaign, either through being disqualified or through being forwarded further into the sales process. You can also see other information here, so we can see which campaign the record belongs to, and a sales rep can be working multiple campaigns simultaneously. They can see the source of the record, the name of the contact, the zip code, the state, and they can also see when the next attempt is due and what the last outcome was with that particular record. If you remember in the slide deck we talked about CRMs not showing this information. CRMs also don't show the information that we see in the last column here, which is a measure of how much effort has already been expended against this particular record. The first part of the fractional number indicates how many successful contacts have been made with this prospect or lead. The second half of the fractional number indicates how many unsuccessful contacts or attempts have been made. Now, we won't dwell on much of the other features and functionality that you can see here, but you can filter, you can sort, and you can also search for records. Let's focus on the call cycle that we discussed in the presentation. I'm going to double-click on Ignatius Vasquez, and we'll take a look at that record. Now, on the left-hand side here, you can see what looks like a traditional CRM view, presenting the contact information for the record and the address and company information for the record. Many of the fields are dual purpose to minimize the use of screen real estate. So, for instance, we can view the Twitter address if the individual has a Twitter address, or their LinkedIn profile if they have a LinkedIn profile, and we can enter that information. We can also see phone numbers, address information, industry information, and so on. Now, if your organization uses a VoIP-based phone system, then ProspectStream does support one-click dialing, so there's no need to dial the 10-digit number on the phone. You can just go ahead and click this icon and it will dial the number for you. We're not going to focus on the left-hand side here too much, though. Let's take a look at the right-hand side, where we're really presented with a lot more interesting information. So at the top here, we see indications of how much effort has been expended against this record, both by me and by other reps within the organization. And so far, we can see that we've had one attempt in total. We can see the outcome of that last attempt at the bottom here. We can see all of those attempts both in the history view with detail. We can see any notes that have been taken, and we don't particularly recommend extensive note-taking since you can't report or metric against that, but you have the ability to view those notes if they are taken. And we can see if there are any related records here in this organization also. For instance, I may call Ignatius and he may indicate that he's not the buyer for the type of solution I'm selling. And in that case, we can go ahead and add a new contact and refocus our calling efforts on that new contact. Or if that contact is already in the database, we can just make them the target of the campaign with one click. So Anna would go ahead and call Ignatius, and then she's presented with messaging. There's no restriction on how many scripts that you choose to build within a particular campaign. In this particular case, we've just built one message script and one voicemail script. Here we can see the message script, and you can see that information is substituted into the script based upon what we know about the contact and the caller. Many organizations choose to literally implement scripts that should be read, and some organizations really develop scripts which are more along cues or suggestions as to what the caller should say. Now you'll notice also within the script then that we have the ability to embed qualification questions. So for instance, as I'm reading the script or conversing with the prospect, if I manage to ask them their age, I can just click on that link, capture the answer, and record it. Again, as I'm reading down, I can ask them a question, capture the answer, and record it. In some cases, questions can have multiple answers, and we'll see when we look at administration that we support a diverse range of question types that you can incorporate for qualification. So we'll go ahead and capture some of these answers here. Now what you may or may not have noticed as I was capturing those answers is that there was a visual cue up here in the top right associated with 3 numerical measurements as to the qualification strength of this particular prospect. So the visual cue is meant to indicate to the caller the degree to which we can consider this prospect qualified. Red meaning not qualified, orange meaning not enough data to make a determination, and green indicating that there's a high probability that this is a qualified prospect. And that visual cue is driven by scores, which are compared against thresholds, and we'll talk a little bit more about those when we come to look at administration also. Let's suppose this is the third or fourth time I might have spoken to Ignatius. I have an alternate view here where I can see all of the answers that we've captured in previous conversations with this individual and the recency of those answers, so I can decide whether or not to ask again and see if the result has changed. In this case, we see one question that has not yet been answered, so we could go ahead and try to secure an answer for that question. Once I've had the conversation with the prospect, qualified them, determined the level of interest, I can then go ahead and record the outcome of the call, and that's the 4th tab. Now we offer a library of over 55 discrete outcomes that gives you a great deal of granularity in determining what happened on a call, but this is completely customizable. Now obviously we captured quite a few answers relative to this particular conversation, so we can assume in this particular case that Anna had contact with the prospect, but let's say that the prospect indicated that they really had future interest. Now we can also record what message I delivered to the prospect, what phone number I was able to reach them on, and the system will automatically calculate an optimum call cycle, in other words, the best date and time in which to potentially contact them again, but we'll go ahead and we'll push this out even further. So once I've filled in this form, provided an indication of what happened on this call, and optionally perhaps captured a note, I can go ahead and record an attempt. You won't find a save button in this application. We're not interested in when the data was saved. What we're interested in this call cycle is what happened in that conversation with the prospect. We need to capture that in order for the system to determine what should happen next. Now when I record an attempt, because I'm currently impersonating a sales rep, the system doesn't even bother taking me back to the call list. What it basically does is tee up the next record that I should be calling based upon the timing and due date at which I should be calling that record. In this particular case, we can see Quentin has had 2 attempts previously recorded against him. One of them was a callback, and when we called back, they indicated future interest. And now we're calling again to see if there's any change in that. Again, we can look at the guidance, but let's suppose in this particular case I don't get an answer, so now I can bring up the voicemail script, read the voicemail to him, and indicate via the disposition tab that in this particular case, I just got his voicemail, I left a script with him, and the system again will project an ideal time to make another callback against Harold. So you'll see that the user interface and the user experience for a sales rep is very efficient and very simple, and basically just involves cycling through records, using the messaging that has been provided by marketing, the qualification questions that have been developed by marketing, to quickly establish whether or not the prospect is a candidate qualified for a sale, and deliver best-of-breed messaging to that prospect, and then record what the outcome of that call was. And as we've mentioned in the presentation previously, it may take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 attempts before you ultimately reach the point of either disqualifying or qualifying or making the sale to the prospect. And this tool maximizes the ability of the sales rep to effect that type of activity against the leads within their database. What we'll do next then is we'll look at the administration side of the application. How do we set up this type of information so that the application is so easy to use for end users? So I'm going to end my impersonation and I'm going to return to my role as an administrator. And I'm going to come over to the administration tab, which was not available to Anna because she's not an administrator. I won't spend a lot of time on each of the tabs. We want to keep this demonstration short. We certainly encourage you to contact us if you'd like to learn more. But I'm going to just highlight the first few tabs and focus principally on the campaign tab. So the first tab is really the database. This is where I can import records, I can export data, I can manually add records, I can edit records, I can perform deduplication and so on. We won't dwell on this particular tab though. The disposition tab is where I have the ability to customize the library of outcomes. So for instance, if I want to add a new disposition, I can go ahead. Let's suppose that we want to add one called send information. We can decide where it sits within the tree. So let's make this a child of action taken. Then we can decide what the outcome is if I choose that particular disposition. So do we retire the prospect? Do we redirect the prospect? Do we recycle the prospect back into the call list? And how many days later do we do that? Do we reassign? Do we mark it as completed? And so on. In this particular case, let's suppose it takes a few days for the information packet to be delivered. So we'll set this to recycle after 5 days. So if I choose this disposition, then the system will automatically put the prospect back in the call queue 5 working days later so that I'll be able to call and I'll see that the last disposition was that we sent information and I'll know to have a discussion with them about the information that we sent. This certainly falls into the categorization of a major disposition that resulted from contact with the target. We'll save that. One of the other things we can do in the application that we won't really have a lot of time to demonstrate today is the ability to model your sales process. So what are the stages that you take a prospect through from first contact to sale? In this particular case, given that we're demonstrating an application that to some degree mimics the insurance industry, we might articulate that those stages include providing information to the prospect, making an appointment with them, taking an application, and ultimately issuing a policy. By modeling these stages, you can then associate outcomes with these stages, and we can then present a dashboard that shows you where every prospect in your database is relative to those stages by user. Campaign management is one of the key areas in which we focused on ease of use. Very often campaign management in CRM applications is a very complex process. Here you can create an unlimited number of campaigns. And those campaigns can span particular date ranges if they have chronological sensitivity. You can set the thresholds for the scoring of the qualification answers. We can indicate how many attempts we would like the caller to place before really deciding that perhaps they've expended too much effort. We can indicate the default spacing for those attempts and restrict whether or not calling should only occur on weekdays and between certain hours. We can decide which users are active in this particular campaign and how records are assigned to them. We can decide which of the dispositions apply to this particular campaign. So there's the disposition that we just added, for instance. And then we can decide which of the records in our database are records that we want to call as part of this campaign. So we can segment by industry, we can segment by record status, we can segment by geography, we can segment by buyer function, we can segment by buyer role, and we can segment by source, for instance. So this allows you to essentially take your entire database and target a subset of that database based upon all of those different criteria. Lastly, here we can develop our scripts. Again, you can have an unlimited number of scripts. Building the script is as simple as using a straightforward word processor where we can embed data elements, we can embed links to other scripts, and we can embed questions within the script. You can also highlight the script, you can change the fonts, change colors, and so on, so that certain aspects of the script perhaps stand out to the caller. But very, very straightforward to build the scripts for the particular campaign. And lastly here we can see that we can develop the questions. A campaign can incorporate an unlimited number of questions. And those questions can capture either single choice answers, text, numeric values, multiple choice answers, yes or no answers, or dates. Let's look at an existing question in this particular library. So you can see this particular question is a single choice answer, and we've provided 5 different answers that are possible here. And you can see with each of those answers, we can associate a score. And those scores drive the qualification criteria and the visual qualification flag that you saw in the application for the end user. If we look at the second question, retirement goals, this is a multiple choice question, and you saw that the user was able to pick one or more answers. For some CRM systems, actually the ability to support multiple choice questions is very, very difficult. Finally, let's look at the last 3 tabs here under administration. Lists allows us to identify those things such as prospect functional titles or prospect roles. You can completely customize those. Roles allows you to model the types of user within the organization and the permissions that they have with respect to viewing data, with respect to reassigning records, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, of course, user management allows me to add, delete, or make changes around specific users within the organization. Let's finish up by looking at a couple of reports here. Some of the reports that we have that you're unlikely to find in a CRM system stem directly from the fact that we capture all of that qualification data. So for instance, I can report the distribution of answers within a campaign. So in this particular case, I'm looking at the inbound call campaign, I'm looking at the responses to the question about their age, and I'm seeing the distribution of answers was all in the 18 to 25 or 26 to 40 range. In this particular report, I'm looking at how long callers are spending with each prospect, in this case for the inbound call campaign. So again, we can see that Anna is spending 158 seconds on the call, all the way down to Mary, who's spending perhaps 12 seconds on the call. So we can look at the level of effort being expended against each prospect by user. Here we can see how many attempts have occurred within a particular time period by users, so we can see the level of effort they're expending. And you can see that there's an extensive and growing library of reports that management can use to understand both the efficacy of the campaign and the effort being expended by the user. We also want to make sure that the users have sufficient work to do within a campaign. Now, this is a very small campaign, but we can see the distribution of records between the different callers, how many are past due, how many are scheduled for today, how many records are uncalled, and so on by user. So you can determine if you need to provide additional work for a particular user because they've exhausted their particular call queue. So that gives you a summary demonstration of ProspectStream. I hope that that gives you an insight into its ease of use, yet its sophistication in terms of administration, and that that administration can be accomplished by marketing personnel rather than IT. Our users typically find that they're able to simulate this application in a matter of hours, sometimes even just an hour of training, and they'll be highly productive, both as a caller and with a little bit more training as an administrator in this application. Just to wrap up the presentation, we'd like to show you two last slides. The first really talks about how do you get started. Well, quite honestly, this is not consultingware. This is software that you can buy and implement very, very quickly. Pricing ranges from $89 a month per user for the full-featured version that you saw demonstrated to some price points which are lower than that if you're willing to sacrifice some of the features that you saw. Implementation of the product takes typically less than a day and requires that you just add your users, import your prospect universe, configure your first campaign, setting the targets, who you want to call, the messaging, the scripts and the voicemails, and the qualification questions, and then you're ready to go. If you'd like more information about the product, then please feel free to contact us. Contact information is presented here, including our website, our email address, our Twitter address, and both toll-free and toll numbers that you can call us on. Again, we'd like to thank you for watching this demonstration and hope that you found it interesting, and we'd love to hear from you.